What were you thinking? A story about learning to control your impulses. Written by Brian Smith, illustrated by Lisa Griffin. I'm hilarious. Hi, my name is Brayden and I'm in the third grade. Just so you know, I'm probably the funniest kid in my school. Seriously, I have made some kids cry and almost wet their pants because they were laughing so hard. Anyway, this year school started the same way it does every year. The teacher explains the rules, we practice the rules, and then we practice them some more. Don't teachers realize third graders know how to follow rules? Well, on Friday, I realized why we practice the rules. My teacher began class by saying, "Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to..." Then it just happened. I shouted out, "Talk about how awesome I am." The class giggled. My teacher, Mrs. Vickerman, said, "Whoa, Brayden, we have rules to follow in class. Is interrupting me when I'm talking to the class following the rules?" "No, I guess it isn't being disrespectful," I answered. "This will make everyone laugh." Right. Remember the first day of school when we talked about those rules, what they looked like in class, and we said, one way to show respect is to raise your hand if you have something to say, and calmly wait for the teacher to call on you. That is one way to control our impulses. Control or what? I'm sorry, Mrs. Vickerman, but that sounds like grown-up talk. Mrs. Vickerman smiled and said, "They are big words, but what they mean is that sometimes our bodies are telling us to do things, and we have to decide whether or not to do them." Later on, Mrs. Vickerman pulled me aside and she asked, "When you shouted out saying we were going to talk about how awesome you are, what were you thinking?" "Well, I thought it'd be really funny." "Right, but did that make the situation better or worse?" I sat there for a second, then sighed and said, "Worse." Mrs. Vickerman explained that there are times to be funny and times to be serious at school. She asked me, "When is it a good time to be funny at school?" "I don't know, maybe lunch, recess, and free time." Right. Mrs. Vickerman gave me a card with 4 easy steps to follow before saying or doing something. They didn't seem too hard. I told Mrs. Vickerman I was sorry and would think before doing things from now on. In our class, step number 1, stop what you're doing. Number 2, think about what you're going to say or do. Number 3, decide if it will make the situation better or worse. Choose the behavior that makes the situation better. Well, all that happened at school, I was surprised to see my mom was making cupcakes for me. Yummy. As they were cooling off on the counter, I went in like a hungry bear. I ate 12 cupcakes and then had a huge tummy ache. Mom came in looking shocked and asked, "What in the world happened to her brother's birthday cupcakes for his class?" "Uh-oh, maybe those weren't for me." "Brayden, you know you're supposed to ask for permission, and with everything that happened at school, what were you thinking?" I was thinking about how good they would taste. "Did eating those cupcakes make the situation better or worse?" "Well, they did taste good," I mumbled. "I'm sure they did, but overall, did that make the situation for you, your brother, and me better or worse?" "Worse," I said as I lowered my head. We went over the card Mrs. Vickerman had given me again. On top of that, I had to help Mom make more cupcakes instead of playing my favorite video game. Not a fun night. Why were these steps so hard to follow? A few days later at school, it finally clicked. I was being my usual hilarious self with my friends at lunch. We were having a great time. Then I felt something mushy and wet smack me on the head. A kid from another class threw some Jell-O at me, and his whole table was laughing. I immediately thought, he just messed with the wrong person. Time to teach him a lesson. I grabbed some of my mashed potatoes and got ready to throw a mashed potato fastball at his head. I reached my arm way back to get full speed. As my arm was about to go forward, I stopped. I got this weird picture in my head of that card. Step number 2. Step number 3. I asked myself, is this going to make the situation better or worse? I knew the answer, but though it was hard, I decided to just raise my hand over my head to get the teacher's attention. Mrs. Vickerman came over and I explained what happened. She went and talked to the other boy, and he had to go to the principal's office to finish his lunch. Whoa! Was I just able to control my impulse? This made me feel good about myself. Later in class, Mrs. Vickerman pulled me aside. She said, I noticed you had mashed potatoes in your hands when you raised your hand today at lunch. Sometimes something tells me you weren't planning to eat those. I smiled and said, yeah, I was going to hit that boy in the head with them, but decided it would be better to talk to you about it since it's one of the rules of the cafeteria. She laughed and said, so what were you thinking? I was thinking I'm sick of getting in trouble and for once wanted to make the right choice, stayed out of trouble. That's great. And your good choice did make the situation better this time. You even followed all the 4 steps. Yep, I said. Maybe I was becoming an impulse expert. That night when I got home, my parents asked my brother and me to pick up toys. And he just left his remote control car, the one he never lets me play with, right in the middle of the floor. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I thought just for a second this might be a good time to take my brother's remote control car and hide it in my closet. But then again, would an impulse expert do that? I knew what the right thing to do was. So I walked into my brother's room and gave him his remote control car. My brother said, thanks a lot, Booger Brain. At first I got mad, then I just laughed. I may be becoming an expert in controlling my impulses, but I'll never be able to control my brother. The end.